Good evening and welcome to the rest of the news. We have a tremendous program lined up for you, and our special guest today is Mr. Brendan Cole, C-O-L-E. And I wonder if you would tell us, you support the right to work.
Yes. Currently there are 24 states that have right to work laws.
24?
24, correct. And the last two states to pass right to work laws were Indiana and Michigan. Then before that, Idaho passed a right to work law.
Well, it seems like Kentucky is one of the few in this area that has not already passed it.
In fact, it's the only southern right to work state not to pass a right to work law. Every state south of here, Tennessee, Georgia, all of them have right to work laws except for Kentucky.
Is that right?
That's correct.
You know, that reminds me of another issue, which is maybe not completely related, that Kentucky is one of the few states that has no parental choice in education.
Okay.
So we're trying to, we would like to have the parents have a say about where their children go to school, and that's an issue that we've been fighting for a long time, but I guess those two issues are somewhat related.
Well, at the Kentucky Right to Work Committee, we're a single issue group.
Yeah.
We focus just on the one
Just
issue.
that one issue. Well, tell us some more about, let's see, Kentucky has this legislation pending.
It was introduced in the last session, and it will be introduced again in this session. Last year, we actually got, for the first time in the history of the state, we were able to get hearings on a right to work law in the State House. And I actually myself testified in that hearing. Of course, there were about 1,500 union members that were in attendance that were, of course, very
Against it.
Yes, yes. And a lot of them were shipped in from different states.
Shipped in?
But I was able to testify, which is a good first step here in Kentucky. And so, if you take a look at states that have become right-to-work states, the economic growth in those states has been very good for the state's economy. Of course, and of course, you have the moral choice that it's wrong to force people to pay dues, and that's what we're all about, is stopping
And of
that.
course, the dues always go for the Democratic candidates.
Well, actually, a lot of money does flow from the coffers of union bosses into campaigns, and a lot of it does go towards, liberal Democrats all across the country.
Right.
In fact, here in Kentucky, you have 98,000 workers that are forced to pay dues.
98,000?
98,000 workers. That's public and private. And that amounts to over $66 million per year in forced dues. $66 million per year. That's the average.
And all of them, I mean, once you pay your dues, you have no control, really, very much at least, on what happens to the money. And
right, and that's why we instead of calling it collective bargaining, it's a much better term for that is monopoly bargaining.
Monopoly bargaining, because the worker doesn't really have that much say about it.
The term collective bargaining would it sounds like, okay, we're all going to work together for what our goal should be, but really what happens is it ends up being monopoly bargaining. And the union bosses instead decide what your pay is going to be and how much time off you get, instead of the worker actually talking to his boss and getting however much he wants that he thinks is right for his family.
Well, it seems like, say, if some of these workers were conservative or pro-family or anything like that, it's just too bad. They're going to have to pay for the campaigns of people that are on the other side.
Well, that is very true. Here in the state of Kentucky, you have several members of the Democratic caucus that have taken thousands of dollars in union contributions. Both Speaker Greg Stumbo and the chair of the Labor and Industry Committee, Rick Nelson, have taken over $50,000 apiece. And in Kentucky, that's not an easy thing to do because you have strict campaign limits here in Kentucky, $1,000 per election. So you can see where the money goes. Instead of a family of four being able to buy more groceries or birthday presents or Christmas presents for their kids, that money is taken out of somebody's paycheck without their permission and goes towards liberal causes all across the state and across the country.
Tell me a little bit about what difference does it make if we have right to work or not?
Well, there are several reasons to have a right to work law. First, you have the moral reason, which, I was always taught growing up that it's wrong to force somebody to pay for something they don't want. When you go to McDonald's and you order a burger, it's a voluntary transaction. When you're at a union shop, you have to pay dues here in Kentucky. You don't have a choice or you're fired. And that's wrong. So the moral argument is a very strong argument because I'm sure that when you grew up, you were told by your parents that you should have a choice on where your money goes and not be forced to give it to somebody that you don't agree with.
Yeah, or a cause that you don't agree with. Yeah,
that's right. And then, of course, there's the economic argument of why right to work is good for the state. In fact, one of the last states to pass right to work, Indiana, since in the year after passing a right to work law, Indiana moved into the top 7 states nationally for private sector job growth. And just a few weeks ago.
Okay, now I think Kentucky has an extra high unemployment. Is that right?
Yeah, the unemployment rate here in Kentucky is a full percentage point higher than the national average.
Maybe partly due to the idea that we have, you don't have the freedom to work without paying dues.
That's correct. And if you take a look, Indiana's to the north, and then you have Tennessee to the south, and Virginia to the east, and also the latest right-to-work state is Michigan.
Yeah.
And you would think of all the states that you would think would not become a right-to-work state, Michigan would be on that list. It's the home of the UAW, Jimmy Hoffa, and Walter Reuther. So we're talking about some of the most powerful union bosses in the entire country. And Michigan's now a right-to-work state.
What about Ohio?
Ohio is not a right-to-work state.
It's not? Okay. But now what about the states south of us?
Every state south of Kentucky is a right-to-work state. Tennessee, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Arkansas, Louisiana, Florida, Texas, Oklahoma, they're all right-to-work states. And Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina.
Now, what else? What are some of the other consequences of passing a right-to-work law?
Well, as I was saying, the economic impact is great. Actually, as I said, Indiana has moved into the top 7 states nationally.
Because there's more employment, more jobs.
Correct.
People, in other words, somebody has a factory, they're more likely to move into Kentucky.
Correct.
If they could hire people without adding to the union.
That is correct. And also, just a few weeks ago, there was a news story that came out from the Indiana Economic Development Corporation. And they said that since right to work has passed, this was a story in some of the local stations up in Indianapolis, since right to work has passed, 64 new companies have moved into the state of Indiana since passage of right to work. 64.
Goodness.
And in fact, the same Economic Development Corporation, just 4 months after passing right to work, Dan Hasler, who was their director at the time, I believe he still is, he testified to the legislative panel in Kentucky that 7,500 new jobs were already in the pipelines just 4 months after passage of right to work.
7,500 new jobs.
And in fact, here in Louisville, if you drive a little bit north here, close to the river, and it's best if you do this at night. So 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning when there's not as much sound, if you listen really carefully, you can actually hear a sucking noise of jobs leaving Kentucky and Indiana.
Oh, please, please.
So that's why Kentucky needs a right-to-work law, not only for the moral benefits that it's wrong and that we need more freedom here in the state of Kentucky, also for the economic benefits, because Kentucky needs more and better paying jobs.
Well, tell me, what happens to the average worker's wage?
Well, that's also very interesting. There have been 2 studies that have been done on that. The first was done by George Mason University's Nobel Prize-winning economics department. And they found that families in right-to-work states have $2,800 more purchasing power than families in non-right-to-work states. So they have more money to spend on their family.
So really, if we passed a right-to-work law, the people working here in Kentucky, their income would go up, you think?
Correct. And also, a more recent study that was conducted by Dr. Barry Paulson, who was a past president of the North American Economics and Finance Association and economics professor at the University of Colorado, his study even showed even more striking results. He found that families in right-to-work states have almost $4,300 more purchasing power than families in non-right-to-work states. So, an even better study showing the economic impact of a right-to-work law.
Wow. Well, you know, when you start talking about right to work, a lot of people say, "Oh no, that's the end of the world. You can't do that. Our income will go down." But really, looks like it goes up. Well, what if they work at Ford Motor Company? Would their income go up or down?
Well, I mean,
you're talking about average.
That's right. Well, Ford is a company that wants to pay. I mean, if you take a look at it from a free market standpoint, a company is going to pay its workers as much as it can, but also make a profit, but also keep the same employees. Because a skilled labor force at Ford, they need skilled workers to keep pumping out the vehicles that are one of the biggest automotive companies in the entire world. And they want to keep the best employees they can. So just from a common sense standpoint, they're going to pay their workers the market rate. And as I was already mentioning, in right-to-work states, workers actually make more. In fact, in Indiana, compensation, if you take a look at what happened in Indiana before right-to-work law, from 2001 to 2011, Indiana workers actually lost a combined $4.6 billion in compensation after adjusted for inflation. But after passing right-to-work law, after only just 1 year, they gained back almost every single penny they lost over the previous decade. They gained back $4.5 billion of their lost compensation. So before Indiana became a right-to-work state, compensation actually went down in Indiana. Afterwards, it went up by a full $4.5 billion in one year.
Wow. I'm told that Kentucky has kind of a high unemployment rate. Is that right?
That's correct. It's 8.9%. That was the July number, which is a little late, but that's the last quarter to come in. And the national average was a full percentage point lower than that, at 7.9%. So a right-to-work law would be good for Kentucky to help get its economy moving again.
Right. So there would be more jobs and more income, more prosperity.
Correct.
If we could get the right-to-work laws where passed.
Correct. I mean, that's happened in states that have passed
right-to-work laws. That's been the pattern.
Yes, correct.
And even in the big corporations like Ford Motor Company or UPS or something, the workers would keep approximately the same wages.
Right.
If they did.
And they would be able to choose whether or not they want to pay dues.
Yeah.
Which is a big difference. I mean, when we're talking about $66 million per year going into union boss coffers, that's a lot of money. I mean, that's money that families can spend on Christmas presents. That's money they can spend on food, a family vacation. All of these help the economy, and also it helps the families because they get to choose where their money goes,
right,
instead of it being taken out of their pockets without their choice. And that's what we're trying to do here in Kentucky, is give them that choice.
Well, in other words, some people will continue to pay union dues.
Well, again, if you take a look at it from a free market perspective, if a worker at a union shop is getting what they want out of their dues, they're going to continue to pay those dues because they think it's worth their money.
Right.
But in Tennessee, workers have that choice. In Indiana, workers have that choice. But here in the state of Kentucky, they do not have that choice, and that's wrong.
You say like the state of Kentucky, the average income would go up if we passed the right-to-work law.
That is correct. In Indiana, it has.
It has, in general.
And also, if you take a look at manufacturing in Indiana, since passage of right-to-work, well, actually, this is in all right-to-work states, manufacturing GDP is 3 times the surge from the last 10 years, from 2002 to 2012, is 3 times in right-to-work states compared to right here in Kentucky. So manufacturing GDP is surging in right-to-work states, whereas it's actually dwarfing what the growth here is in Kentucky. In fact, PHH Fantis, which is the nation's longtime leading business relocation firm, explained why Kentucky is having such a hard time attracting new jobs. They actually reported that 50% of businesses automatically eliminate non-right-to-work states like Kentucky when relocating. And of course, those are good-paying jobs that are going to Indiana, that are going to Tennessee, that are going to Virginia instead of Kentucky.
Now, you mentioned GDP, gross domestic product.
Correct.
So that's sort of like the income for the whole state.
And obviously, businesses have more income. The workers, first of all, there's going to be more workers because the more workers a company has, the more profit it can spit out, because that's the more product that it can introduce into the market, and the more money and the more profit it'll have. And obviously, if a company has more profit, they'll have more workers, they can expand more, and here in Kentucky, they don't. But in Indiana, they're growing. They move into the top 7 states nationally for private sector job growth. And of course, it's interesting when you drive from Bowling Green to Nashville. When you get to the Tennessee state border, of course, you have the sign that says, "Welcome to Tennessee," but really, they could take that down, and you could notice that you're in Tennessee, because literally there is the state line, and then right next to it, you have manufacturing plants. And so workers are actually driving from Kentucky to Tennessee because it's a right-to-work state, and that needs to happen here. So when you're in border states of Ohio, workers are driving from Ohio to Kentucky for jobs instead of Kentucky to Indiana.
And you hear a sucking noise on the border.
That's right. And I want that sucking noise to be on this side of the border from the Kentucky and Ohio line. I want people in Cincinnati driving to Kentucky
to get a job.
That's right.
How does it look in the state legislature this year?
Well, we're working on getting the bill introduced right now. And so we're, as I said, last year we had the first hearing in the history of the state, which was a great step forward.
Was that in the Senate or the House?
It was in the House, because currently the House is controlled by Democrats, and every Democrat, we believe, will vote against right to work, because, as I mentioned, you have Rick Nelson and Greg Summill that have taken huge money from big labor, and that's a theme that goes throughout Democrats. Not that some Republicans don't take big labor money, they do, but a lot of it goes towards Democratic politics.
What about the Senate? Did they?
Well, right now you have the Senate is controlled by the GOP, and so we believe there actually are enough votes in the Senate to pass a right-to-work law. But the House is, of course, a concern.
Now, we went through this maybe 5 years ago or something, didn't we, where it was introduced and the right to work law was introduced in Kentucky, and there was screams of bloody murder, and that didn't pass.
Well, the same thing happened last year. You had huge crowds that were big labor crowds that were bussed in here to Kentucky.
Bussed into Kentucky.
That's correct.
Oh,
a lot of them, actually, it was interesting when Indiana passed a right-to-work law. After they passed a right-to-work law, you actually had, there were actually big labor PACs that were actually giving money to try to, saying that, there was outside influences that helped pass a right-to-work law in Indiana. And yet the big labor PACs that were giving money to candidates in Indiana were from Chicago.
From Chicago.
That's correct.
Who is that guy in Wisconsin that kind of went through something like this?
Well, you had Governor Scott Walker.
Scott Walker.
And he actually passed a bill that was a public sector bargaining reform, and part of that was giving a partial right to work to some public sector workers. He unfortunately excluded police and fire, but it was a step in the right direction. And actually, Governor Walker was up for, they actually recalled him.
Yeah.
And actually, Governor Walker actually won his recall election by a bigger margin
than his original election.
Exactly. And actually, it was against the same guy.
Yeah.
Mayor Barrett from Milwaukee. And the reforms that he pushed through were never even mentioned in his campaign, because the mayor of Milwaukee, Mayor Barrett, actually used those reforms to help balance his city budget. And so he couldn't use the reforms saying they're bad, because he used them to balance the budget.
What about the House? I mean, what's the difference between the Democrats and the Republicans there?
Well, currently it's 54-46.
So 46 is the Republicans.
Correct.
And the Democrats are 54.
That's correct.
Okay, so that's a difference of 8?
Correct. Yes.
And so if 4 of them change places, that would even it out.
It would. And of course, there's an election coming up in November, And we're a 501c4, so we're strictly a legislating.
Yeah.
What we do is we let we ask people to take a stance on an issue. And actually, the first thing that happened in Indiana was we were able to get a roll call vote in Indiana.
A roll call vote.
And it puts the Democrats and Republicans both on record, because, as you know, a politician will talk all they want about an issue, but until they actually have a vote on that issue, you don't know where they stand.
Right.
So the first step we took in Indiana was we got a roll call vote. And then the voters were able to hold the politicians accountable in the next election, because every voter in the state could see that, okay, this guy is against right to work and this guy is for it. And the voters could hold them accountable.
Well, can that happen in Kentucky?
That would be the plan here, to try to get that roll call vote.
Yeah.
And so, once again, so the voters can hold the politicians accountable.
Well, now, are there, you only need 4 legislators to have, like you say, 4 Democrats would lose and 4 Republicans win.
Correct.
Then it would kind of change so that you would have a balance and you could bring up the laws that you wanted to and things like that.
Correct.
Of course, I keep bringing back the choice in education laws because we're doing the same thing with that issue, which we don't want to mention. But so if just 4 elections switched parties, 4 districts,
correct,
it would change all. We get to have a prosperous state and more jobs and better incomes and all of this.
Well, that's right. Well, one thing to keep in mind is in Indiana, which now is the state of Indiana has huge Republican majorities in the House, Senate. You have Mike Pence, who is now the governor of Indiana.
Yeah.
It was a very interesting road in Indiana, because for a long time Governor Daniels did not want to pass a right-to-work law. Now we were able to use we have thousands of members all across the state of Indiana and Kentucky, and they were able to pressure their legislators, because politicians are concerned about one thing, and that's getting reelected.
Yeah.
And so once the voters can get it in their minds that Indiana, or in our case Kentucky, needs to become a right-to-work state, so workers have that choice, we can have more freedom here in the state of Kentucky. That's how change comes about, is by the voters contacting their legislators and letting them know this is something that we want. And this is something that's happened all throughout American history. You have voters contacting their legislators to pass all sorts of bills throughout the history of the United States. Some good, some not so good.
Yeah.
And of course, a great example of this was after Obamacare was passed in the U.S. You had a lot of people that voted for Obamacare were defeated in the next election because they had voted for something that was against the will of the American people.
Right.
And the voters held them accountable because they didn't agree that's something that should be happening in the U.S.
Well, do you think you can get a roll call vote in Kentucky this year?
Well, as I said, that was one of the first steps we took in Indiana.
Yeah.
That's something that we're trying to get grassroots pressure built up here in Kentucky to help get that exact same result here in Kentucky, so we can move closer to making Kentucky a right-to-work state, as it should be, just like Indiana, just like Tennessee, just like Virginia.
Well, like you say, you don't know what side a politician is on, and
that's right.
Until you get a roll call vote.
That's right. And Indiana is a great example of that happening. We did the exact same thing in Oklahoma. The legislators voted on a right-to-work law, and then all their constituents can see who supports right to work and who doesn't. Because actually there was a poll done in 2012 by Rasmussen.
Yeah.
That shows that 74% of the American people believe it's wrong to force workers to pay union dues. So we're talking about not just Republicans are for this, Democrats and independents are for this.
Yeah.
Because they believe it's just plain wrong to force somebody to pay dues.
Especially when those dues uniformly go for left-wing politicians.
That's
almost
right.
uniformly, anyway. I mean, even if you don't believe in what those politicians stand for, you're still going to have to pay into their campaign.
That's
that
right.
doesn't seem right.
That's right. And the fact that you don't get to choose where your money goes, it
Yeah.
goes into a union boss's pockets, instead of yours, so you can, feed your family and do the things that you want to do with your family. Instead, a union boss gets to choose where your money goes instead of you choosing.
And really, it has an influence on the prosperity of the whole state.
That's right.
And the jobs in the whole state and the income in the whole state. It just has a lot to do. The only thing holding it back is, sort of a stranglehold that.
Right. I mean, well, in Indiana, it was a big victory for us. Michigan was an even bigger victory.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, certainly if those two states can do it, and there are more workers forced into unions in those two states than there are in Kentucky. If they can do it, Kentucky is certainly able to do the same.
How can our listeners get a hold of you or find out more information about this?
Our national affiliate is the National Right to Work Committee, and they have a website, nrtwc.org.
Let me do it real.
NRTWC. Then also Kentucky Right to Work Committee, and that's our national affiliate. The Kentucky Right to Work Committee is also on Facebook.
Facebook.
So you can check us there, and we'll have a website up very, very soon.
You're on Facebook now?
Kentucky Right to Work Committee, yes.
Now, do you go by the initials or write it out? Or?
KYRTW.
KYRTW.
It'll be .org, and that'll be
.org.
And we also send out lots of mailings to our members across the state. And we have newsletters that we send out so people are up to date on what's going on in the battle against forced unionism.
Do you have emails that you put out? Or?
Well, as I said, the website will be up very, very soon. And
that would be the best way. Wait till the website. Mm-hmm. What's the website going to be?
The KYRTW.org.
RTW.org.
.org.
Okay. But how long do you think it'll be before that comes up?
It'll be up, I don't have a definite date, but it'll be up relatively soon.
In a week or two or something, a month or two?
Probably closer to the month or two range.
Okay.
Because right now we're mostly focusing on talking to people about right to work.
Yeah.
And letting them know what's going on here in the state of Kentucky, and then so they can contact their legislators to let them know that they believe that forcing workers to join unions is wrong.
Yeah.
So that's our main goal right now, is to build that grassroots pressure all across the state.
Because it means taking money from somebody and giving it to something they may or may not believe in.
Correct.
I certainly appreciate you informing us about all of this, and we'd like to invite our viewers to tune in again next week for the rest of the news.
Any fatalities? It's not good news.
Baby, it's okay.
God never gives us more than we can handle, right?
Well, sometimes he gives us more than we can handle alone.